Thank you very much, everyone. It's very nice to see all of you here. My name is Musa Mushabela. I am the Vice Chancellor here at the University of Cape Town. And I'd like to take this moment to greet all of you, all our academics, staff, students, guests that are here, family members that are here, but all members of the University of Cape Town, both in the room, but also those who have joined us online. Thank you very much. It's a special evening where we will be celebrating one of our own. It is my great pleasure to host and welcome you to the inaugural lecture of Professor Gina Ziervogel. Can we give her a round of applause? I'm very delighted that you've all managed to join us here and celebrate with us this important milestone in Prof. Gina's academic journey. Let me also extend my warm welcome and greetings to the family of Professor Gina Ziervogel, and specifically to the parents, Carl and Lynn. Greetings to you, and we are going to be congratulating you a lot this evening. Let me also welcome and greet Rob, the husband, as well as the kids, Cameron and Faye. Look at him; he's just like. Earlier on, I congratulated them, and they said, "Oh, what did we do? We did nothing." I think, Cameron, let me put it on record that that achievements like we are witnessing and celebrating this evening are not easy to achieve without family. And I know that, you know, Prof. Gina spends many days working and being away, traveling, sometimes complaining, hopefully never in tears. Journeys like this, they span many years of work. And for our academics, there is always the family who's providing support quietly behind the scenes. We see them performing here at work, delivering lectures, presentations, doing their research, publishing their papers, applying for grants. But we know that the family is behind them. We also know that we take them away from you because they spend a lot of time with us, time that they could, precious time that they could spend with you. So it's also why this evening we have to celebrate with you. And you are very much welcome. It's also your celebration. It's also your achievement. And we congratulate all of you. And because you are here, Professor Ziervogel is also going to present this inaugural lecture in very simple terms so that you can all follow. It is to my advantage because I can also understand what she's saying. If you were not here, I might be left confused. But thank you very much for being here, and congratulations once again. We don't achieve professorate level in isolation, in as much as we often say it can be a lonely journey, but there's many people that support us. And the same goes for Professor Gina as well, people who provide encouragement, guidance, and support and inspiration. A lot of mentors, a lot of students, supervisors, collaborators, partners, donors, funders, colleagues in the corridor, and colleagues from afar who are there to support and prop the journey. I understand that there's also some colleagues of Professor Gina here from the municipality who work closely with her, and thank you for your partnership and for working closely with her. So let me also just take a moment to introduce you to the platform party. We've got Professor Hussein Suleiman. To my left, he is the Dean of Science, and he will introduce Professor Ziervogel. And she needs no introduction. I will introduce Dr. Anna Taylor from the African Climate and Development Initiative, and she will offer a vote of thanks. And hopefully by then we can have a wrap up and enjoy more celebrations and a party outside. So let me also say that inaugural lectures are meaningful to us as a university. They are an occasion in the life of a university that invite all of us to pause and celebrate achievements of our scholars whose work would have expanded and extended knowledge, would have influenced thinking, and would have contributed much to society. Inaugural lectures also remind us that universities exist not only to generate new ideas, but very importantly, to share these ideas. We have to debate them and we have to apply them in ways that can make our world a better place. So this evening, we are very fortunate to have an inaugural lecture titled Water Under or Over the Bridge, Governing Trade-offs in Climate Adaptation. Of course, climate change is the one thing that leaves many of us understanding and appreciating the interconnectedness of our world. There's not many things that demonstrate this so clearly than climate change. Its impact is not confined only to our national borders or academic disciplines. It affects our economies, our health, our infrastructure, our ecosystems, our communities. It also compels us to ask very difficult questions about leadership, about governance, about equity, whose responsibility it is, and the trust of science or the mistrust of science. As a university, we appreciate this kind of convening because it gives us an opportunity to contribute to these conversations. And we do so through rigorous research, informed debate, and meaningful engagement with society. And fortunately also, as we often say, the delivery also needs to be extended to a broad audience. This is an open platform that also invites community members to join us. So they too need to be able to follow and engage in the conversation. I am very proud of our scholars at this university whose work extends beyond the walls of this university, and their work help us address the challenges, the pressing challenges that we have in society, like climate change. Their scholarship reflects our belief that excellent research should not only advance knowledge, but it must also improve lives, influence policy, and strengthen our communities. Professor Gina Ziervogel's ascent to professoriate reflects sustained academic excellence, intellectual leadership, and a deep commitment to research. On behalf of the University of Cape Town, I congratulate you, Professor Ziervogel, on reaching this significant milestone in your academic journey. We look forward to hearing the insights that you will share with us this evening. And it is now my great pleasure to invite my dear colleague, Professor Hussein Suleiman, to introduce Professor Gina Ziervogel. Let's welcome him with a round of applause. Welcome. Good
afternoon. Or is that evening? I think it's afternoon. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Professor Gina Ziervogel today. And I'm actually very happy to see so many people from across the Faculty of Science and the university attending this lecture. I recognize many of you as you walk in. So, what do chameleons, otters, and owls have in common? I asked AI, and the AI said that the one thing they have in common is that they are particularly well suited and adapted to their environments. It also turns out that these are the favorite animals of Professor Ziervogel. You can connect the dots. Gina is a geographer and an international recognized expert on climate change adaptation, urban governance, and resilience. She is director of the African Climate and Development Initiative, what we refer to as ACDI, and a professor in the Department of Environmental and Geographical Sciences at UCT. Her research focuses on how cities and communities can adapt to climate risk, such as droughts and floods, and the importance of understanding governance and capacity to enact change for more equitable and resilient futures. Gina has worked extensively with municipal governments, some of you are here, and NGOs and civil society organizations in South and Southern Africa to explore how adaptation interventions might better respond to local needs while addressing broader policy challenges. When she isn't professing, I am told, she can be found on the mountain, in her garden, or reading a good book. But when she isn't reading, she is writing. Gina has published over 50 academic pieces. That word is quite significant because they're not just publications in the traditional sense. She was a lead author on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Sixth Assessment Report. She co-led the development of South Africa's National Climate Risk and Vulnerability Assessment Framework. Her applied scholarship has included serving on the City of Cape Town's Water Resilience Advisory Committee and co-authoring the book Day Zero, One City's Response to a Record-Breaking Drought. Her academic journey began with the BSc at UCT in Environmental and Geographical Science and Oceanography, followed by an honors in Environmental Water Management at Rhodes University and a DPhil in Geography at the University of Oxford. She returned to UCT from the so-called Ivory Towers and has remained here for the last 25 years or so. I first met her when she enthusiastically joined the very first transformation committee in science more than 20 years ago, Gina. Gina is a B2 rated researcher by the NRF, and she has received numerous accolades, including the UCT Social Responsiveness Award, the South African Women in Science Award, and a Fulbright Scholarship. In 2023, Gina joined an expedition of 100 women scientists to Antarctica as part of the Homeward Bound International Leadership Program that combined leadership development with reflection on our planet's future, and I believe first-hand observations of penguins at some point. She has also been part of the Women in Leadership Program, reflecting an enduring commitment not only to her own leadership, but also to strengthening and advancing leadership within the higher education sector more broadly. Gina's career thus far has illustrated excellence in research, in teaching, and leadership. But most importantly, her work exemplifies the power of engaged scholarship to shape both science and society and influence how cities and communities respond to climate change. I now welcome Professor Gina Ziervogel to the podium.
with the hood.
Good evening, and thank you all for joining me online and in person. I want to start back in 1997 when I was an honours student in environmental water management at Rhodes University. We were in the Cat River Valley in the Eastern Cape. I was in my baggy shorts on a field trip with classmates. Our fluvial geomorphology course had us working with the local community to understand why the erosion and land degradation along the river was so severe. We sat on the eroded banks, looking up at the bridge, and I listened to the mothers explain that after heavy rain, the water flowed over that bridge, and on those days, the children could not get to school. That was the turning point. I found myself wondering whether we were studying the thing that mattered most and how the science we were learning might speak to what they had just told us. That question became central to my work, how knowledge about the environment might contribute to more just and equitable development. At school, I had been tempted towards my parents' path. Both of them worked in the health professions. They encouraged me to follow what I was more passionate about, which was the environment. After a BSc at UCT in Environmental and Geographical Science and Oceanography, and honours at Rhodes, I joined the wave of young South Africans doing the UK work and travel stint. After 6 months in London, I wanted a change and went to Oxford to work as an au pair. I took a detour when walking into town to look for temp work. And I walked past the School of Geography. I went in to ask for work, and soon I started working as a secretary there. I then started as a research assistant, and while I was a research assistant, I was doing an advert for PhD scholarships, which I applied for and got. But to my surprise, I've continued along the academic path, which I was not certain I would do. Before I go further, I want to say something about the people who got me here. Academia is a collaborative affair, as we have heard, and I'm grateful for all those I have worked with, listened to, laughed with, and sighed with at UCT, across South Africa, and abroad. But it is part of a bigger personal journey too. I'm so grateful for all that my parents and sister have given me, mostly their love. My friends have been a constant thread, weaving in and out of each other's lives, through the highs and lows. Thanks, Rob, for being the calm in the turbulence and for adventuring with me on the rapids. And Cameron and Faye, you climbed into the boat with us, and I can't wait to see where the river takes you. Now to the question that brings me here. How we might best adapt to climate change while meeting our various needs. By climate adaptation, I mean how we reduce the impacts of climate stresses and shocks. And by transformative adaptation, I mean reducing climate risk while also reducing structural and social inequalities. What I've learned is that climate adaptation is not primarily a technical problem to be solved with more information. It's a social, political, and developmental process. Transformative climate adaptation requires understanding vulnerability, navigating trade-offs across scales, bringing different capacities and knowledges together for innovation and change. I will unpack this through 5 pillars of the bridge we need to build for water to flow under it. Pillar 1, understanding vulnerability. Sitting in the thin air under a blue summer sky in the highlands of Lesotho in 2000, in my first year of my PhD fieldwork, I was interviewing Masentle about how she might use the seasonal climate forecast. For 5 years, Lesotho Met Service had been sharing the forecast on the radio and through extension officers, whether to expect above or below normal rain for the season. Masentle told me she could not say what she would do with the forecast because she had never used it. But she had plenty of suggestions for her neighbors. She had swapped my question for a better one. Talking about someone else let her reason out loud what might work. I realized the problem was my method, not her answers. So in my second year of fieldwork, I stopped interviewing. I brushed up on my participatory method skills, designed activities where farmers mapped out their seasonal calendar with stones and drew timelines of past decisions. I then used a role-play activity where different groups of people acted out 3 imaginary years with the different forecasts. Playing out a season together, people unpacked what and when to plant given the new information, how to water, and what they might do with their livestock. And when they worked out how best they wanted to hear the forecast and how it sat along the traditional forecast they already used, they then could think more about what they might do. And these methods told me more about how the forecast might enter the household's planning than the interviews had. This was in service of what looked like a simple question. Could climate information help people prepare for climate variability and reduce their vulnerability? Vulnerability was only beginning to emerge as a key concept in climate research, and my supervisor, Tom Downing, encouraged me to think beyond hazards, to look at how exposure, sensitivity, and the capacity to respond shaped people's vulnerability and experience of climate impacts. I returned to UCT after my PhD and continued to work in Limpopo, Mpumalanga, and the Western Cape, with Emma Archer, Sukaina Bawani, and others, building on a field that mentors Colleen Vogel and Karen O'Brien helped establish. This has been alongside many contemporaries whose work has shaped mine, with special mention to Hallie Eakin and Lisa Schipper. What became clear was that understanding individuals' decisions required looking beyond the individuals themselves. Their choices were shaped by access to resources, by government support or its absence, by social networks, economic pressure, and cultural expectations. The forecast was seldom the decisive factor. This is not an argument against climate science. Scale matters. For a household deciding what to plant next season, the forecast is one input among many. For a city sizing stormwater infrastructure for the next 50 years, climate projections are essential. What changes with scale is not whether information matters, but what else has to be in place for it to make a difference. Gradually, my focus moved from understanding climate information use to understanding vulnerability itself, a topic I have enjoyed exploring with my students too, particularly in the third-year EGS Vulnerability Videos module. Through my work, I showed that at the local level, climate information supports adaptation only when it is understood inside the social, economic, and institutional conditions that produce vulnerability in the first place. With colleagues at the Climate Systems Analysis Group, we took this into practice through the Climate Risk and Vulnerability Assessment Framework, CRAVA, that we developed for national government. It did two things I think still matter. It matched the depth of assessment needed to the decision at hand, combining quantitative and qualitative approaches rather than prioritizing one. And it treated vulnerability assessment as part of an ongoing adaptation pathway rather than a once-off exercise. Unpacking the nature of vulnerability over time taught me why successful adaptation outcomes are often more difficult to achieve than expected. Technical interventions and better information can reduce risk. They do not automatically improve the well-being of people who are most vulnerable, because vulnerability to climate change is produced by inequality, by ordinary development failures, by unequal access to resources and opportunity. It is made by decisions usually taken well before any drought or flood occurs, which raises further questions I have unpacked in my work. Who makes these decisions and at what scale? And what would it take to build the capacity to make them differently? And underpinning this, two questions about what this means in practice. How do we produce knowledge about this? And how do we turn it into something that works? Pillar 2, governance across scales. Stepping out of one of the monthly Water Resilience Advisory Committee meetings on the 5th floor of the Civic Centre, I asked one of the city's senior water managers what he had learned from the drought. We could see by then that Cape Town was moving into safer territory. He looked surprised and said he hadn't had time to think about it. At first, I was shocked. On reflection, it made sense. For months, people across the city had been consumed with holding off day zero. There's no space to step back while you're still inside the crisis. That did change. The city ran a substantial process of learning and reflection that I was part of, together with people such as Gareth Morgan, Peter Willis, Rolf Eberhardt. And emerging from the drought, the city's new water strategy was a more holistic understanding of the water system and stronger integration across sectors. That capacity to learn is often missing in government. Cape Town showed that organizations can genuinely evolve through crisis. And given the rainfall this winter, those lessons may be tested sooner than we would like. Afterwards, I did some work for National Treasury to consolidate what had been learned They wanted to share the lessons with other cities. Interviewing the key actors helped me understand the drought decision-making that was largely invisible to the public. It also provided a set of lessons for strengthening urban water resilience. Lessons about managing the water system as a whole, about building a networked supply rather than relying on a single source, about integrating climate change data into water planning, and the importance of relationships within and beyond the city. I felt those lessons needed to be shared more widely and worked with Leonie Joubert on a book documenting the experience. As citizens, we need to hold government to account. But doing that well requires understanding the complexity of the decisions and the constraints they are made under. As academics, we need to help with that. But that is one account of the drought. There is another. Working with the Environmental Monitoring Group in the Western Cape Water Caucus and with Johan Enquist and colleagues at Stellenbosch, we were making sense of household water stories through the Correct project, Community Resilience in Cape Town. We documented the experiences of more than 300 low-income households. For them, water stress was never really about dam levels. It was about water cutoffs, poor infrastructure, billing uncertainty, and the difficulty of daily life in a lower-income neighborhood. One woman described what happened when her grandmother's water was cut off. When my grandmother's house water was cut off, oh my word, it was horrible. There are 3 families living on the property. They had to ask neighbors and family for buckets of water to survive. After struggling for many, many months, the matter was addressed. But by that time, the children were sick and the ladies in the house had infections. Nobody intended this. The city needs revenue to keep water flowing, and tariffs are billed per connection, with one connection assumed to be one household. But when backyarders move onto a property, the basic allocation is spread across 3 families instead of 1, and the bill climbs into the punitive tariff blocks. Then the drought pushed tariffs up, and a bill that had been difficult became impossible. That is a trade-off. A tariff that accounted for how many people actually lived on the property would have been fairer. It would have taken longer to decide and design than a crisis allows. So an existing rule, not designed with backyarders in mind, hurt households least able to absorb it. This is what I mean when I say adaptation is fundamentally about trade-offs. They are often not made explicit, not because anyone's hiding them, but because they are internal to the decision makers, shaped by external pressures and often made with time and resource constraints. Decisions get taken at one scale, the consequences land at another. The South African Constitution commits us to a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. If that commitment is to mean anything in South Africa's just transition, we need governance arrangements where trade-offs across scales are surfaced rather than absorbed by those with the least power to refuse them. Understanding who governs cities and how is central to finding more equitable adaptation outcomes, a direction that Sue Parnell, Clifford Shearing, and the late Di Scott helped me find, and I have been pleased to explore further with my students, including Nadine Methner and Kulthum Omari in their PhDs, and Joe Banya in his current postdoc. The challenge is not choosing between the city's priorities and the households, it is finding space for both. This takes more than goodwill, it takes capacity, and not the kind we usually mean. Pillar 3, transformative capacity. Walking with Mr. R through Green Park Informal Settlement, what struck me first were the gardens. Backyard plots bigger and more productive than those I'd seen in other informal settlements. Green Park sits on the edge of Drift Sands Nature Reserve, near Cape Town Airport, and the same conditions that made those gardens flourish, better soil, more moisture, also meant that every winter the low-lying land bordering those wetlands flooded. Mr. R, a charismatic local leader, welcomed us into his home and told us about the settlement's long struggle to be seen by the city. As he put it, "We have been promised housing for a long time, and we did not want only promises, so it was a rocky kind of relationship. But it actually made a difference to where we are now. We are more kind of understanding the city now. We are understanding the dynamics and the challenges they are faced with. The relationship is rocky because we are desperate, of course, but things are normalizing after the city will agree to finance the electricity situation." What the rocky relationship eventually produced in 2015 was 3 large gravel platforms like this one. The compacted gravel raised the ground level so that relocated shacks no longer sat in the flooded wetland. This meant the city was ready to install electricity. For residents, this was as much a priority as staying dry. The platforms themselves look like incremental adaptation, a technical fix that reduces exposure to flooding. The governance process that produced them was another matter. Getting the platforms built required the City of Cape Town to engage the settlement and different departments in ways that departed from formal planning practices. It was a shift towards a hybrid mode of making decisions that drew on both formal and informal institutions. Mr. R worked as an intermediary between his community and local government, disrupting formal processes, making them navigable, and drawing on strong social networks and a history of organizing that reached back to the struggle against apartheid. This is what I mean by transformative capacity, the capacity to undertake adaptation that not only reduces climate risk, but simultaneously addresses development priorities and inequality. It is a capacity that matters most for the urban poor, who are typically most exposed to climate impacts and have least access to resources. Through my early work and that of my students and colleagues, we have brought attention to the difficulty of understanding and supporting adaptation in informal settlements, where the categories of formal planning fit poorly and where climate risk is only one of many pressing concerns. One project that helped shape my thinking about transformative capacity was the FLOW project, Fostering Local Wellbeing, with Anna Khan, John Ziniades, and Penny Price. Rather than asking whether people could cope with climate risk, we asked what conditions communities need in order to thrive in the face of environmental and social change. The project centered on a group of youth ambassadors in Piketberg. They mapped resource flows through their town. This included the natural resource flows that many of us don't understand or think about enough, yet are critical to our survival. The ambassadors designed and ran a baseline survey of informal businesses. They became mojos, mobile journalists, and made some excellent short films. This was alongside daily reflective practice and rotating leadership, all building their agency. The municipality was directly involved in project activities and working with the youth. Over time, the officials shifted to see the ambassadors as collaborators. The films were good enough that the municipality used them to explain their own services to residents. When the project ended, the municipality kept supporting the ambassadors, the clearest sign that something had shifted. As one FLOW team member commented, what FLOW achieved is just the start of an imagined future in which planning will be participatory and owned by the community. Looking across these projects, I came to see inclusive governance as central to transformative capacity and identified 3 elements that support it. Wide participation and active inclusion. Governance has to move beyond state-convened workshops towards authentic deliberation, in which marginalized groups hold a direct seat at the table. Diverse modes of governance. Transformative capacity is strengthened where municipalities draw on hybrid arrangements that combine formal and informal, top-down and bottom-up, centralized and decentralized networks. And sustained intermediaries. Informal settlement leaders like Mr. R, practitioners in NGOs and NPOs, or academics can play an important boundary role to bridge sectors and scales and do the patient work of aligning actors whose interests do not naturally converge. For many years, capacity building for climate adaptation has meant training, tools, and information. Those things matter. I've produced a fair share of them myself, but on their own, they're not enough. The challenge is not that people don't know their options. Mr. R knew exactly what his settlement needed. The youth ambassadors were not short of ideas. What was missing is space for those actors to negotiate, to build relationships and understanding of the system, and to create resource flows that outlast a single project cycle. Earlier this year, the Global Justice Project published an ambitious vision, a plan for equality and prosperity within planetary boundaries. It states that a just society and a just world depend on the empowerment of all strata of society, beginning with its most disadvantaged and powerless members. That empowerment does not happen through better plans. It happens through institutions, relationships, and trust, supported by intermediaries to create a place for people who are usually outside the room. I have spent a good deal of my career trying to be one of those intermediaries. It has changed what I think research is for. Transdisciplinary work. The Environmental Monitoring Group offices on Nuttall Road in Observatory hold a special place for me. One of my early sabbaticals was spent there rather than on campus. 6 months hanging out with Jessica Wilson, Thabo Lessuti, and others. A few years later, I was working with Thabo on the Correct project I mentioned earlier. the Western Cape Water Caucus were in the room, and we were reflecting on how we had been gathering knowledge about community water challenges. The caucus wanted to build their own research skills so that their advocacy could rest on more than individual testimony. At the end of the meeting, Thabo turned to me and said, "Gina, the problem with you is you are both our funder and our friend." I've thought about that sentence often. He was not complaining, and he was not letting me off either. He was naming something that transdisciplinary work makes harder to see. I held the money. And because we work in a language of partnership, co-production, shared problems, it can be hard to acknowledge. Being a friend to EMG did not dissolve the asymmetry. What it did was make it possible for Thabo to name that. These types of interactions have made me reflect on what kind of academic I am. I've moved between being a researcher, a teacher, a funder, a facilitator, and a partner. I began my academic journey as a reluctant academic, unsure I wanted to stay in a university at all, and have become an applied one, working alongside academics from other disciplines and societal actors to define problems jointly, generate knowledge together, and look for what might work. That was never simply a methodological choice. It was an admission that many of the most important insights about climate risk sit outside the academy. Which brings me to a current transdisciplinary project. In Tue Pamoja, that Petra Holden and I co-lead, we are working with Shack Dwellers International, their affiliates, including Cork here in Cape Town, and with academic partners across 4 African cities. We are exploring how nature-based solutions might reduce flood risk in informal settlements. This time, SDI and their affiliates are partners with their own share of the grant. We still lead it, so the asymmetry has not vanished, but it has a different shape from the one Thabo named, an approach we are trying to foster. We didn't start with climate risk, but with the priorities residents named themselves, surfaced through a settlement-level profiling exercise that got people organized around their own concerns before engaging with city climate agendas. As part of positioning settlement priorities alongside city activities, we ran a workshop last year. It was one of those rare days where you can feel something shifting in the room. The Khayelitsha residents' stories were hard to hear and the solutions genuinely complex, but people came and listened. Residents spoke about flooded homes and years of stalled progress. Officials from 5 different city departments listened, looking at maps of where interventions had been tried and where the flooding is worse. By the end, it was agreed that the next step was walking through the settlements together. That visit happened earlier this year, and it was the residents who did the teaching. They showed us the micro nature-based solutions they had already built. They showed us what it's like to live beside a wetland with water that seeps into your life. And they showed us a recycling operation that they were driving themselves, which was cutting waste in the settlement and generating a small income at the same time. This reinforced a finding that runs through my work. Climate interventions succeed when they align with what people value and when they sit inside broader development processes rather than beside them. Which is why I've come to believe that all knowledge should be welcome here. Local knowledge tells us whether a response will survive daily reality. Technical knowledge tells us about environmental and climate variability and about legal, social, and economic options. Both are necessary. But bringing knowledge together across genuinely different ways of understanding the world is harder than it sounds. It asks people to hold their own views more lightly than they are used to. When it is done well and leads to a real improvement in people's lives, it can be transformative. So how does that integration actually happen? That question has become a research contribution in its own right. Alice McClure has unpacked it in detail through her PhD work on expansive learning in the Fractal Project through a number of South African cities, including Lusaka. And it's been a pleasure to supervise her. And looking forward, Anna Taylor and I have started GapTrack, a new project which will assess urban adaptation progress in Cape Town and Nelson Mandela Bay, supporting those cities to see how far they have come and to think about what comes next. What runs through all of this is a simple finding. The earlier different parties share their priorities, the more likely it is that an intervention will meet more than one set of needs, which is why I have valued working with filmmakers, artists, and journalists, getting insights out of the academy and into the places where those conversations actually happen matters as much as producing them. Transdisciplinary research of the kind I've described takes time, commitment, and ways of working that neither the academy nor society is well set up for. I've learned how hard it is for research to have real impact, given how research is usually structured and funded. But it has also been a gift. It has let me interrogate what being an academic is for. what we can and cannot contribute to societal change, and to do that as a person with hopes and fears who cares about others and about the state of the world. That is also what I've tried to carry into leading ACDI, which I took on 3 years ago from Mark New. As a research institute, we are committed to excellent research and to developing future leaders, but equally to partnerships, to supporting decisions, and to thought leadership at the nexus of climate and development. It is difficult work. We do not always get it right, but it is the work I want to keep doing. And Thabo was right. I was both. The good work happens when you can have honest conversations, but these conversations need to translate into action. Pillar 5, social innovation. In 2008, I was on the banks of the Shire River in Malawi with the late Pablo Suarez, who taught me that creativity and fun are central to engaging people. On the banks, Banda, who worked for the Red Cross, showed us how high the water had come in the last flood. He told us how they had built a flood early warning system, and it was not what you might expect. Villages upstream had been given bicycles so that when the river rose, someone could ride ahead and warn the villages below. And in one village, people had stopped keeping chickens and started keeping ducks, because ducks swim. Through support of the Red Cross Climate Centre, the village youth made videos of these innovations and shared them with other villages. These responses were locally grounded, built on local resources, tested against a real flood. We need far more of this. Yet, there's less of it than you would expect. 2 years ago, Ralph Hammond and I did a review to see how the concept of social innovation was being applied in the climate adaptation field. And the answer was surprisingly little. That is starting to change. Adaptation has a lot to learn from how innovation works elsewhere, including how to collaborate across sectors and draw on what business and civil society each bring. But first, the idea needs to be developed, ideally together with the people who most need it. That stage seldom attracts the support it needs. So with Lavinia Perimal, Darlington Sabanda, Anna Taylor, and Mark New, we have been exploring how to provide that support, connecting people with ideas to the researchers, entrepreneurs, and communities who need to be part of shaping them. This is needed to turn climate priorities into tested, evidence-based responses. In 2024, we ran a pilot with 4 teams across South Africa. Through design thinking workshops, teams moved from ideas to working prototypes, and participants left with skills and capacities they had not had before. One team's prototype was Beat of the Drum, an automated flood early warning system with community support built into it, replacing a system that was manual and purely local. When reflecting on their individual learning, one participant said, "It was hard to juggle a focus on climate aspects with identifying the best solution to the challenge, which was climate relevant, but not necessarily directly climate focused." That is exactly the tension. Climate is seldom the problem people lead with, but learning to work with that rather than against it is a capacity we are only beginning to build. It also became clear that the short process was not enough. Teams needed more support than we gave them, and behind the teams there needed to be an ecosystem, funding, mentorship, somewhere for a prototype to go next that lets adaptation, innovation take root and grow. Building that is the work ahead. In conclusion, progress on climate adaptation has been too slow. Partly that is complexity. Working across temporal and spatial scales is genuinely hard. Partly it is that we treat adaptation as an environmental problem when it is a social and political one too. And partly it is that investing now against so many other urgent priorities is a difficult thing to ask. But the price of not investing will be far higher, and it will not be paid by the people making the decision. The challenge is substantial. We need to reduce emissions urgently, and we need to be better prepared for the hazards coming our way. Climate change will keep testing our institutions, our relationships, and our imagination. If you work in government, ask who was not in the room when the rule was written. If you're a practitioner, be willing to have your plan changed by the people it is for. If you're a student, learn how to listen to people who see the world differently from you. And all of us are citizens who need to hold government to account and be honest about what is serving us and what is not. Universities play a role in this too, as I hope I have illustrated. Producing evidence, developing people, and moving between communities and government. It is difficult work. We do not always get it right, but we will keep doing it. I remain hopeful because for every person I've named tonight, there are many I have not. people in settlements, in municipalities, in NGOs, and in universities who are quietly getting on with building the futures they want to live in. What they have taught me is this work asks us to be bold and at the same time to care for ourselves, for each other, and for the world we are handing on. And so I return to the title of this lecture. Water will not always flow under the bridge. Sometimes there will be too much, and sometimes there will be too little. Increasingly, it shows us the limits of the systems we have built and the inequalities that decide who bears the consequences. The challenge is how to build the institutions, the capacities, the relationships, and the innovations to navigate the river more justly. Thank you for coming on this journey with me.
Good evening, Vice-Chancellor, Dean, colleagues, collaborators, family, and friends of Professor Ziervogel. It's such an honor to be able to celebrate Gina's academic accomplishment, and it gives me great pleasure to offer this vote of thanks and appreciation both to Gina and to all of you who have been part of her journey getting to this esteemed point. Firstly, thanks to Gina. I speak on behalf of many of us when I say a heartfelt thank you. Thank you for giving us a reason to gather together this evening in celebration. Thank you for what you have taught us about assessing climate vulnerability and planning adaptation, bridging between the social and the biophysical aspects, drawing particular attention to the capacities that people have and need to adapt to climate stresses and shocks like droughts and floods, not just building our conceptual understanding, but also the practical tools for strengthening these capacities. Thank you for showing us how to be an engaged scholar and a transdisciplinarian, working across departments, faculties, and well beyond academia with non-governmental and civil society organizations, as well as many spheres of government, to bridge between the business of knowledge production and that of making the decisions to actively reduce climate risks. Thank you for being such a generous collaborator and mentor, giving space and guidance to your students, your colleagues, and project partners in a warm, encouraging, and insightful way to really enhance everyone's insights and learning, but also the impact that they're able to make. On a personal note, thank you for the fun times that we've shared doing field work, like in Sekekuni, at the many workshops, conferences, and write-shops that we get to do over the years. Thanks for your help in getting me started at SEI Oxford and then to navigate the UCT soft-funded career ladder, which, to be honest, as an interdisciplinarian soft-funded researcher often feels less like a ladder and more like a game of Twister. Your encouragement and support have definitely played a big part in shaping my trajectory, as well as I know it has for many others who are in the room here with us and also online. Thank you for taking the helm at ACDI and leading us through a period of rapid growth and transition, giving us strategic direction and new structures and processes to cohere our collective yet diverse work efforts, and a new home at ICTS on Main after much patient yet pointed deliberation and negotiation within the complex UCT system. Thank you for being the calm, consistent, constructive, caring, and connective force in our lives, tirelessly linking South African engaged scholarship with international scientific and policy processes like the IPCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, really pushing for more equitable and transformative types of adaptation. Lavinia and Britta have a small token of our appreciation, which I'm sure they will hand over to you later. Or here comes, oh no, yes, later. Secondly, so after thanking Gina, I'd secondly like to thank Gina's family and her many close friends. Huge thanks to her parents, to her husband and her children, Carl, Lynn, Rob, Cameron, and Faye. Thank you for sharing Gina with us. Thank you for keeping her supported and grounded, nourished and challenged in healthy doses, all the ingredients needed for ongoing growth, energy, and balance. Thank you for being her sounding board and her source of fun and adventure, especially when we spike her stress levels with lots of complex work demands. To Gina's wide and diverse network of colleagues and collaborators across UCT, in EGS, ACDI, at other universities, think tanks, government departments, NGOs, funding agencies, thank you for working with Gina to grow the rich ecosystem of passionate people committed to understanding and driving action on climate resilient development in South Africa, across the African continent, and globally. Thank you for showing up in such big numbers tonight to make this such a special occasion. It definitely highlights Gina's capacity to draw us all together. And finally, thanks and appreciation to UCT, especially the science faculty, for being an institutional home for Professor Ziervogel and the many of us that work with her. UCT has bred thought leadership on issues at the nexus of climate and development over many decades, exemplified by Professor Ziervogel, which we need more than ever in the world today. So thank you for facilitating this occasion and being the home and platform from which we can do our work. With that, I hand back over to Prof. Moshabela. Thank you.
Anna, I had those veiled attacks. Thank you very much for those kind words, Anna. And may we take a moment to invite Lavinia to come down to hand the gift, the appreciation. They may come down. Shall we encourage her with a round of applause?
Thank you, Gina. On behalf of the team at ACDI, we chose those flowers because they're local, they're strong and resilient like yourself.
Right. You know, when you mentioned, what did you say? You said you got, you walked into Oxford, you were going to do au pair, then you went looking for a job, and then you became a secretary in the, is it geography? And then you drafted an advert for a fellowship, which you applied for. And then you got it. I started to wonder if I'm going to have to answer for a case of conflict of interest. She already has a defense for it. But I think you really got me on the point about, is it Thabo? About being a funder and a friend. And I thought that they're going to refer to you as the researcher or the academic, but you were also a funder and a friend, and you captured it well that you have moved through sort of many roles. And I think sometimes we emphasize in academia the importance of depth in one area over an extended period of time. And we forget that the depth that we build need people who are going to be the connectors. people who are system thinkers, people who are complex thinkers, and who can navigate the complexity. People who are brave enough to sit with communities and listen to them and change their methodology, because the community voices are being heard. And people who are brave enough to let go of the control, even though you are a lead investigator and you control the grant, and allow communities to co-create with you to a point where they feel ownership of the work that is being done, the intervention that is being designed. People who are brave enough to see value in indigenous knowledge and practices and nurture them and elevate them within the context that people live in. Now it makes sense why this lecture had to be delivered in this building, in the Neville Alexander building. So thank you for your work. Congratulations once again. Very well done. Congratulations to the family. And thanks to everyone who's been here. And I'm also grateful to all the partners that have supported Gina along the way. Marks the end of the evening. Allow the platform party to exit, have refreshments outside and enjoy them. Thank you for being here tonight.